Welcome to Stoic Psyche Wisdom. In today's story, we confront a truth that many feel, but few dare to speak. What happens when the silence in your marriage isn't loud, but bottomless? When the man you married no longer sees you, but the man who used to, the one you never truly let go of, suddenly returns. You think you'll be strong. You think you know yourself, until you're standing in your kitchen, face to face with something you buried years ago, and it asks you to feel again. This isn't a story about betrayal. It's about recognition. It's about the price of emotional starvation and the depth of attention we all crave when our identity fades beneath the roles we've taken on. My dad asked for something unthinkable. You won't believe what I did next. Let's begin. Part 1. The silence that doesn't yell. There are silences in marriage that scream. And then there are the ones that don't. They don't start with slammed doors or sharp words. They begin in the stillness between routines. In the rehearsed, "How was your day?" and the predictable brush of hands across a dinner table that used to be magnetic. We weren't fighting. No bitterness. No hostility. From the outside, we looked enviable. That couple. The stable ones. The ones who'd figured it out. We had the jokes. The dinners. The Sunday routines that could survive on autopilot. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling seen. Not neglected. Not exactly. Just transparent. Like I was still being looked at, but not noticed. Touched, but not felt. Mentioned, but not remembered. He still reached for me at night. Still held me when the house got cold. But it was mechanical, gentle, efficient, timed. We'd become professionals at closeness and amateurs at intimacy. I didn't dress for him anymore. And strangely, I didn't miss his attention. What haunted me was the emptiness of not being missed myself. Part 2. A message from the past. The message came on a quiet Thursday. A name I hadn't seen flash on my phone in years. Antonio, my stepfather, my mother's second husband, the man who had once been a quiet constant in the corners of my youth. He was flying in from Portugal. "Just for a few days," he said. "Thought I'd stop by, if you're okay with that." I should have felt joy, but what came instead was static, that faint crackle in the soul when something reawakens. Not love, not excitement, but the warm disorientation of facing a version of yourself you thought you buried. He wasn't in my everyday life. He belonged to a different chapter, the girl I used to be when everything still had flavor. He used to notice things. Not just the obvious, but the nuance. How someone's voice wavered mid-sentence. How hands trembled when the heart was trying too hard not to speak. He saw the invisible. Part 3. The arrival. It was raining when he arrived. Not dramatic rain, just that soft, cinematic drizzle that makes the world look like it's remembering something. He stood at the threshold of our house, like he belonged in the scene of a film I hadn't seen yet. Older, of course, but not dulled. Still refined, still him. When he hugged me, he didn't squeeze. He measured. The space between the past and the present. His voice low. "I almost didn't recognize you." And I, without thinking, replied, "That's what time does." Dinner that night was like walking a tightrope over memory. He let my husband speak, interjecting only when needed. But across the table, his eyes found mine. Not in lust, not in nostalgia, but in recognition. He saw me, the subtle weight behind my laughter, the pauses I didn't think anyone noticed. It had been years since someone looked at me like they were listening, even in silence. Part 4. Nightfall whispers. Later, when the dishes were done and my husband disappeared upstairs, spreadsheets glowing in his lap, I found myself on the back porch. The rain had stopped. The world smelled like new beginnings. Wet bark, cooled earth, something ancient. He joined me, quietly. No dramatic entrance, no purposeful closeness, just presence. He handed me a glass of wine. "You always like the quiet," he said. I nodded. "I forget sometimes." Then a pause, a silence that didn't need to fill itself. He turned to me, his eyes not hungry, but honest. "You look tired. Not just tired, but the kind of tired that's inside." That one sentence pierced through years of shallow compliments. It wasn't adoration, it was attention. And it hit deeper than any compliment ever could. We didn't touch, but something reached and held. Part 5. The slippery edge. The next morning felt different. I wasn't thinking about seduction, not directly, but I paid more attention to how I moved. The way water clung to my skin in the shower, the feel of fabric on bare legs, the small intimacy of wearing something soft. Not for him, not for anyone, but for that hidden part of myself that wanted to be felt again. When I walked into the kitchen, towel still, wrapped around my head, he looked up from his coffee. No wide eyes, no flirtation, just presence. And yet I felt seen, felt the space I occupied, the way he noticed my rhythm without invading it. We moved through the house like practiced strangers, but the air was heavier, not oppressive, just more real. Around noon, I asked if he wanted to see the garden. Part 6. The bench beneath the cedar. Outside, the sun touched everything like a painter's brush. The lavender had bloomed again. I hadn't even noticed. He walked slowly, deliberately, stopping to touch leaves, to inhale basil, to witness the world. I watched him with awe, envy even. How he lingered in the present, how he made observation feel like reverence. We reached the old bench beneath the cedar tree, sat closer than necessary, but not touching, just close enough to feel breath shift when the wind moved. We spoke of travels, Kyoto, Tuscany, Morocco. But it was never about the places. It was about the way he spoke of feeling alive. Then I asked, "Did you ever feel like you missed something by not settling down again?" His answer was quiet. "Of course, but I learned to make peace with the version of love I could carry." I don't know why, but I asked again, "What kind was that?" And he replied, "The kind you never name, but never forget." Something cracked inside me, not from pain, but from remembering what longing feels like. He asked for black coffee, no sugar. We sat in that booth like two people waiting for a storm to pass. I traced the edge of my teacup, letting the heat anchor me to the moment. He leaned back, gaze drifting to the shelves, lined with worn spines and forgotten titles. For a while, neither of us said anything. But the silence between us wasn't empty. It was a breathing thing, pulsing, waiting to become something more. "Do you remember that time we got lost in Sintra?" he asked suddenly, a half smile curling on his lips. I looked up, startled, not by the memory, but by how vividly I could still see it. The winding roads, the thick fog, the way he'd laughed when I insisted we were going in circles. We never found the lookout point we were searching for, but that day we'd found something else. "I remember," I said softly. "I was furious. You hated being out of control." "I still do." He nodded, eyes never leaving mine. "But you didn't panic. You trusted me to find the way back." Something in that sentence hit deeper than it should have, because it wasn't about Sintra. It wasn't about directions, or fog, or missed turns. It was about now, about the places we'd wandered into, emotionally, spiritually, about the dangerous terrain between memory and desire. You were the only man I ever trusted that way, I admitted, even when I shouldn't have. His expression didn't change. He just reached for his coffee and took a slow sip. And I realized that quiet was his way of holding space. For me, for my truth, for the version of us that never quite had a proper ending. When we left the cafe, the sky had darkened slightly. Not from rain, but from something more atmospheric. The way light bends when the day is nearing its close, but hasn't yet surrendered to night. We walked back to the car slower than necessary, both of us pretending it was because of the crowded sidewalk or the uneven cobblestones. Back in the driver's seat, I didn't start the engine right away. My hands remained on the steering wheel, fingers drumming softly. He glanced over but said nothing. I don't know what this is, I finally said. I don't know if it's memory or madness or both. It's you remembering yourself, he said. I turned to face him fully. And you? I'm just the mirror. That line stayed with me for the entire drive back. Even after he'd gone silent again, even after the house came back into view, like something too familiar to feel real. My husband's car was in the driveway. He was home early. My heart skipped in a way it hadn't in years. But not out of fear. Out of friction. The crash between worlds I was still trying to keep separate. Inside, the air felt charged. My husband was in the kitchen, humming faintly, chopping vegetables. He looked up, smiled, and kissed my forehead as I walked past. His normalcy was almost jarring, as if nothing had shifted, as if I hadn't kissed another man in that very same room, as if the woman standing in front of him was still the same woman he'd married. But I wasn't, and I knew it. That night, I lay beside him, the ceiling spinning slowly above me. His hand brushed my arm, the same way it always did when he reached for me in the dark. But I couldn't return the touch. Not out of guilt, but because I realized how long I'd been giving pieces of myself away for the sake of routine. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still, cloaked in the softness that only exists before the world fully wakes. I moved through the motions, shower, coffee, robe, but everything felt altered, like I was performing in a play I no longer remembered auditioning for. He was in the guest room, packing slowly, folding his shirts with care, his movements methodical. I watched him for a moment from the doorway. You're leaving? I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He looked up. My flight's in a few hours. I nodded, stepping into the room. Feels fast. He held up a neatly folded sweater. Doesn't it always? There was a pause, a breath suspended in the air between us. I'm not sure what any of this means, I said, but I know I'll remember it. He smiled, softly, sadly. That's enough, sometimes. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that some moments exist not to be defined, but simply to remind us of our capacity to feel deeply, to be alive in ways routine never allows. When we embraced at the door, it was different than when he arrived. This time, the hug held history. It held knowing. It held something we wouldn't name. My husband offered to drive him to the airport again. I declined, said I wanted to, said I needed the alone time. And perhaps that was true. In the car, we didn't talk much. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. When I pulled up to the terminal, He didn't reach for the door right away. "You'll be okay," he said, more statement than question. "I'm not so sure," I replied. "Then maybe that's where it begins." He leaned in, kissed my cheek, not lingering, not romantic. Just a seal, a closing, a promise not to forget. As I watched him disappear into the crowd, something in me broke, but not in the way that wounds do. It was the kind of break that cracks open space. Space for truth. Space for redefinition. Space for something more. When I got home, my husband was in the backyard, watering the rosemary bush. He looked up and smiled, waving slightly. I waved back, heart heavier than I could explain. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror again. The same mirror, the same face. But something was different. Not the lines, not the expression. It was in the eyes. The eyes of a woman who'd remembered something vital, that she is not just a wife or a partner or a role to play. She is a woman, still capable of being moved, of being stirred, of being seen. And sometimes that's where everything starts. Outro, delivered calmly, slowly, and with emotional resonance. This isn't a story about betrayal. It's a story about awareness, about the dangerous quiet that grows in marriages when we stop seeing each other, and worse, when we stop seeing ourselves. Sometimes it takes a ghost from our past to remind us what it means to feel alive again. But the real question isn't whether you'll act on it. The real question is, will you ignore what it awakened in you once it's gone? Thank you for watching Stoic Psyche Wisdom. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you think, remember, or reflect, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that cut deeper than the surface. Until next time, stay conscious, stay wise, and never stop looking inward.